Hey everyone, we are here with Katherine Williams. Katherine is co-founder and chief editor of Variantista. Thanks for being here with me.
Well, thanks for having me, Tyler. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Well, so perfect. So let's get started with how did you start Variantista? What got you into that?
So it
And what
actually
is it?
started technically a long time ago. When I was a kid, I absolutely loved reading. I loved storytelling. When I was in school, all I would be doing is daydreaming about a book that I was reading or a story that I wanted to write and waiting for recess to go and act that out with my friends. And then I would go home and I would just write. People would be like, "Do you want to come over?" I'd be like, "No, I want to write."
Nice.
Yeah, and I in the beginning started with I want to write novels, I want to write movies, I want to, be a star, and I love performing and I love writing books, fiction and nonfiction. But as I,
Yeah.
grew up and I started thinking about, okay, well, how can I use this to impact people beyond novels, beyond stories? Is there a way that I can write for a living? And I didn't really know what to do because I didn't want to be a journalist. It was one of those things like I'm like, I don't want to get into that. So what do I want to do?
Yeah.
So, instead of studying writing in school, I studied acting because I didn't know what I wanted. And then
Yeah.
I fell into actually education. I
Okay.
started with tutoring and then it evolved into specializing in reading and helping children learn how to read. And it was a very interesting thing to see how my passion turned into something quite practical. Because as I worked with
Yeah.
dyslexic kids and as I worked with ADHD kids who had a really difficult time focusing or had a really difficult time, with letters flipping or words flipping or entire sentences flipping, I I realized that I loved helping people learn because when you have a child or you have just a person in general who isn't confident and you in like a specific thing because they think, oh, well, this should be easy. Everybody can read. All of my classmates can read. Why can't I read? They think I'm stupid or they think that I don't have anything important to say. And then they
Yeah.
begin to think that themselves. It's
Right.
really an incredible thing to watch somebody learn that they are capable and they are capable of not just understanding the words that somebody else has said, but they're capable of producing those words and expressing themselves. And so as I dug into that, which was just kind of it started as a pastime of, oh, I need some summer money. I realized like I love helping people learn and I love helping people learn the way that they learn. And then I moved to China. I moved to China because I was beginning to start pursuing freelance writing as a full-time job, but I was struggling. I was maybe 23, 22, something like that. And I was struggling to execute it because I still didn't know how to do it. I was getting some gigs
Yeah.
online, but it wasn't enough to sustain me. And I got this offer to move to China and become an ESL teacher at actually quite a prestigious school now that I think
Oh,
about it.
cool.
And I got to learn on the job how to teach in a classroom and how to teach a wide variety of kids through a cultural divide, through I only speak
Yeah.
English, most of them only speak Chinese. How the heck are we
Right.
going to do this? And like I had a teacher there that spoke Chinese who helped bridge the gap. And there were students who had been
Okay.
studying English their whole lives. But I learned in that process that everything that I learned about teaching somebody to read and instilling confidence in somebody and empowering them with the ability to use words and empowering them with inspiring stories that were outside of them and showing them, hey, there's more to life than what you think there is, and there's more to you than what you think there is. I learned that storytelling is incredibly powerful because it can cross cultural divides. So many times I would play videos in my classroom and the kids would tell me later, they're like, teacher, we don't always understand the words, but we understand what's happening on the screen. And because we understand what's happening on the screen, we're learning the words. And I'm like,
Oh,
exactly,
interesting.
exactly. That's what's
Yeah.
supposed to happen. And so when I came
Right.
back from China, during the pandemic, I didn't really know what I was going to do because I thought, I was like, oh, well, I thought I was going to be a teacher. I thought I was going to be over there for like the next 10 years. I really loved it. What am I going to do? And I was reminded, I'm like, I love writing. I love communicating. There has to be something that I can do. There has to be something that isn't being done to serve the public. There has to be a place for me in this. And it took about a year of doing just full-time freelance writing, trying out all kinds of different mediums, all kinds of different niches, working for a bunch of different companies, sometimes as an employee, sometimes as a freelancer, for me to figure out there is a lack of storytelling in the copywriting and marketing industry right now. And there is a lack of inspiration, and a combination of inspiration and visibility. There are so many brands out there that they've got the inspiration part down, or they've got the education part of their brand down. Like they have one thing that they specialize in, but they don't have the other pieces that are necessary to get them in front of their audience or connect them with their audience. I can't tell you how many startups I've seen who they have a wonderful idea, but their founder's too close to the idea to write the copy.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of a long-winded way of getting there.
That's perfect. And so that's kind of where you've landed, right? So the Variantista, that's kind of your target market, or I guess your main objective is to help people tell their story, tell their brand story. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
cool.
I want to help brands, particularly startups, connect with their audience on a soul level. You know,
gotcha.
And combining it with the technical aspects of things too, because like SEO is important, research is important, purely informational content is absolutely necessary. But just because it's purely informational doesn't mean that you can't put yourself in it. And if you don't want to put yourself in it, that's perfectly fine. There are still ways to make it engaging for, you know, Joe Schmo off the street who's not necessarily in your target market, but fell across your site and then suddenly converts because of the way that you presented things.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, well, so really quick, one point I wanted to ask is, have you heard of, or did you ever do a National Novel Writing Month?
Oh my God, I've tried to do that so many times, Tyler. You don't even know. And like, there are times I've gotten close. I didn't do it in November, the first time I wrote a book in a month. I did it in February. It was 15. It was terrible, but it was a book.
Yep, there you go. And so if I remember right, National Novel Writing Month, like, you know, it happens, I think, right in November, and it's supposed to be 10,000 words. Is that right?
It kind of depends. I've read it different ways. I've read it 10,000. I've read it 100,000. They're basically like, write a book. Just write a book. And there are people who've pasted out with calendars and everything. And I'm just like, I understand the principle is to get the idea out of your head. And I'm a big advocate of that. But let me tell you, it's not easy.
Right. Yeah, it's intimidating. I've tried it several times and I've never made it. One day, maybe. Well, perfect.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, you set crazy goals and then, you know, even if you don't meet them, you're further along than you ever would have been.
Totally. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I read back on those old novels and I'm pretty embarrassed by them, but it was a fun experience. And like, I'm glad I've come a long way since then.
Absolutely.
Well, perfect. So, I mean, so going back to what the meat of what you were saying is, you know, you're helping people and brands tell stories. So what, I guess, in your mind, how much of a brand's communication to their audience, how much of that really ties back to storytelling? Like, is it kind of 50% informational, 50% storytelling? What's the ratio?
You know what? I think that depends on the type of brand and it depends on your target market. It also depends on like what you've already developed, because if you already have a deep connection with your audience, then really your goal at that point is to foster it and to help bring your audience to the point of conversion or to continued loyalty. And so then I would say it's probably a 30-70 ratio, 30% storytelling, company culture, letting them into your life or into the mission of your brand, that kind of thing. And then 70% informational, educational. But the thing that gets tricky about that is that overt storytelling is obvious to pretty much anybody. Like, oh, Jimmy went to the store and experienced this thing and it changed his life because blah, 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 blah. You can see the beginning, middle, end, the characters, all of the things. And so like that content's very evocative and very obvious to everybody. Oh, hey, I'm being told a story. Oh, hey, I'm learning more about the company and their mission and all of the things. But even in informational content, in informational content, you can still have elements of storytelling. You can still have a story structure and bring people through. And that's very important because it creates a logical flow and it creates consistency. You can also incorporate, when you need to incorporate, your brand's language and the way that your audience thinks into each individual post. And if you're doing something more educational, you can even infuse like mini stories into it, examples of what other people have done, case studies, things like that, which make it more engaging. But you can infuse any kind of storytelling element into really any kind of content, and you absolutely should, because people resonate with it, whether they like you or not. They resonate with it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that's probably the most powerful lesson I've been learning recently is, like you say, it doesn't have to be such a, I don't know, conspicuous story of like characters and settings and all of that. Like you can still infuse storytelling elements into pretty much everything you do. And that's what I've learned actually recently. I've been putting out a lot of short form content, and like each clip that I pull out isn't necessarily a story, but it has all of these different elements, right? Like I need to hook people in, I have to capture the attention, and then I do need to keep that attention, right? And so I need to continue to pique their interest and move towards this kind of climax of the clip and then resolution, right? So there's I totally agree. I think there is storytelling in almost every bit of communication that a brand or a person is doing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. And actually one example I'll give real quick is locally there's a Fry's Food and Drug. It's like the Kroger grocery brand.
Oh, okay.
But they put out an ad. I think I saw it on Hulu or something. And it was amazing. It was a 30-second ad. And they told this like beautiful story. Like my wife and I were almost emotional at the end. Like it was kind of like the beginning of Up, right? Like where just this super short storyline, but then like by the end you're crying, like how did they do that? I mean, Fry's Kroger, they did an excellent job at that. And like it really does. It evokes more powerful emotions than just like your typical informational, just shove it into your face, information.
Exactly. And I want to say that there's a difference between like using story elements to fluff up your content and, make it look like it's helpful, and actually using those elements as part of education. And that's, I think, a very fine line that you need to walk when you're creating content. And it's hard, even for an expert. It is a challenge, depending on what the brand is and depending on what they're trying to say. Because like, if you've got there's some very difficult products out there, and it's like, how do you angle that,
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so that actually ties into one question I wanted to ask was, when do you feel like is the right time for a brand, a company to hire somebody that is an expert copywriter? Like, when does my founder base level of skill run out and like, okay, now I need to bring in an expert?
Oh gosh, I think that depends again on the brand. I keep saying that.
Of course.
I'm finding sooner rather than later, and it's because if you get your copy right from the beginning, especially before you've launched, like when you're developing your website, you should also hire your copywriter, because they can start on your content plan and they can execute it across all channels. And I say as soon as possible for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can nail down what your brand is about, and you can nail down what copy is working and what copy isn't with your smaller audience. And that's incredibly important for early conversions. It's incredibly important for building loyalty, and it keeps your brand message consistent across all of your channels, which is absolutely essential, as you're moving forward. You can always change your message. You can always mature your voice, but if you establish it from the very beginning, you're going to have a much better client retention rate, at least from my experience. Obviously, that again depends on the different brands, and sometimes you have to try a couple different forms of messaging before one sticks, because that's part of the experimentation process. And then from a technical side, again, I say as soon as you really can, or even before you think you can, because the copy can really make or break your visibility online. You want to be as visible as possible as soon as possible. And you can do that through promoting your things on social media, absolutely, and you need to. But it takes on average 30 blog posts on your website and 3 to 6 months before Google even starts to index your website.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so if you want to be visible and have organic search, you need to get content online as soon as possible, and you need at least 30 blog posts in order to do that. And so gaining traction in that way is absolutely essential, especially when you're new.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And this actually brought up, I mean, you know, when I hear 30 blog posts, I cringe a little bit, because we've tried, you know, starting blogs or writing blog articles, and it's a lot. And so, just a question that came up in my mind is, how have you, well, I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Like, obviously there's a lot of AI type writing assistants coming up, you know, like copy.ai or, you know, things like that. And I haven't used them extensively, but, you know, they tell me that, you know, they can write a blog article for me. So what's been your experience? Like, are those effective? I'm sure, you know, you still need kind of it's like a low code software tool, like, right? You need still an expert to monitor that and fix it up. Are those effective? Are those helpful or not?
So I've experimented with them a little bit, just because, you know, curiosity, right? Like, can they really replace writers? That's the hot button topic right now.
Hey everyone, in this quick break, I wanted to give a shout out to Coconut VA. They are making this podcast possible. This podcast is hosted by me, but a lot of the back end work is actually done by a Coconut VA. I'm the co-founder of Coconut VA, and we find Filipino virtual assistants for US companies. So if you've got a proven business model, you're growing, you need help with operations, general admin, lead generation, or really any help around the business, you could probably hire a Coconut VA. You can find a link on my podcast page, thebtspodcast.com, or at coconutva.com. My podcast is a great example of how a Coconut VA could help you. I've done the work to systematize my podcast, systematize the production process, and now I can bring in a Coconut VA to actually execute that process. If you're ready to delegate tasks, you're ready to hire a Coconut VA.
And I would say, no, they can't replace a writer. Because of the way that the coding is, we're still a long way away. I'm not a technical person at all. I can write about it. I can market it. And my team can do it even better than I can. But I can tell you, we're still far away from them being able to take over, because the human touch is absolutely necessary. Now there are some that are very, very good. Like, I haven't used Copy AI, but I've experimented with Jasper a little bit. And I know that Jasper is very good at putting together cohesive sentences, and it's very good at creating a logical flow. The tone you can play with in there, but honestly, if you want something artistic, you need a person to generate that. And so maybe as a rough draft, it wouldn't be bad, but you need to make sure that you're paying attention, and you need to fact check. You got to fact check, because it's pulling from the internet. It's pulling from all over the internet. And you don't know, is it pulling from reputable sites? Ideally, it probably is. But you need to make sure that it's saying things that are 100% accurate if you're going to put it out there, especially if you're going to be marketing a product with it. Does that make sense? Totally. And I mean, that's kind of the experience we've had. Like, we've done a little bit with Copy AI, like I said, not really blog posts, but that's been our experience. Is like, honestly, it's nice for, like, if I'm staring at a blank page and I don't want to write anything, like, it's kind of nice to go to Copy AI, like, hey, just, you know, spit something out. And like, even though it's crap, like, okay, now I have a starting point. Now I know, okay, I can see what's bad and what are the good elements that I can now pull out and expound on. Yeah, it goes into, it's kind of like breaking your writer's block, right?
Yeah, totally.
I find that oftentimes when I'm stuck what I do is I will brain dump all of the information on my onto a page, and that's oftentimes really terrible too. But
Right.
it gives you
for sure.
something to work with. It starts with a sentence structure, because sometimes it's just the structure that's really daunting, or sometimes it's the content itself that's really daunting, because you're like, I really care about this thing, but I don't know how to be objective, and I really want it to communicate this thing, and then you put yourself in a state of paralysis. And so I can definitely see how using an AI tool for something like that, just as a starting point, as a jump off, could be very useful.
Cool. Awesome. Perfect. So one thing you mentioned earlier is like a great example is you're not necessarily a techie person, right? But you can still write about tech, and like you can, so kind of going into that, how have you found, what's the best way to kind of get into the shoes of your audience? Like, how do you know who you're writing for, what they care about, what you should write about, what's going to capture their attention?
I would say the best thing that you can do is listen. Like, really listen to what they're saying and what they want. Because when you're doing market research, you can go onto forums and find your target audience and read about the different conversations that they're having, and read about the different opinions within that market. And that really helps you understand the different philosophies of thought, the different emotions that are surrounding pain points, that are surrounding hot button topics, things like that. And if you're in conversation with somebody, so when I'm in conversation with a client, I'll oftentimes start evaluating who they are from the very beginning, because that's part of my job. And having an understanding of psychology is really helpful here, because people will tell you everything about themselves in answering the most simple, benign questions. So you could ask somebody, hey, what do you think about orange trees? And that's totally random. It makes absolutely no sense. But then, and they might even laugh and be like, why are you asking me about orange trees? That's just so weird. It's like, oh, it's an icebreaker that I learned, whatever. And then they go, okay, well, I guess if I have to answer. And then they'll start telling you what they think about orange trees. And depending on the kind of person they are, they might say, I really like oranges, but I don't like the environmental impact, and these are the reasons why. Do you know how much it costs to ship an orange from Florida to Chicago? Blah, 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 blah. And they'll just go on a tangent about the environmental impact of agriculture. And you go, okay, this person obviously is very conscious about what's going on in the world. They are well researched, they're well read, whatever. And then you can start asking more specific questions about their brand and about their life. A different person, you can ask them the same question, and you might say, hey, what do you like, or what do you think about orange trees? And they'll start telling you about an orange tree that grew in their grandma's backyard, and it was the very first thing that they ever painted, and and that's what inspired them to become an artist or whatever. And then you ask them, it's like, oh, well, why did you paint that? It's like, oh, because, I used to play, and I used to eat the oranges, and I just used to think about how beautiful life was. And then you say, oh, okay, can I see the picture? Do you have it? And if they do, you can tell a ton from that picture that they painted too. Like, are there people in it? Is there family in it? Is it just the tree? What kind of art style did they use? So all of those little things can tell you so much about who a person is and what matters to them. And you can even do it from what they're wearing. Obviously, that's a little more superficial. Some people, they don't put their personality into their clothes, but you can look at the way that they carry themselves. You can listen to their thought patterns as they're speaking and the emotions that they're putting into it. Where do they focus their speech? And I think that's really where you start. And all you need to do is have a few guiding questions to really nail down, okay, on first meeting, I know what this person is about. I may not have all of the nuance, but as we work together and as we develop their content together, that nuance will make itself very known very quickly.
Interesting. And so, I mean, a follow-up question to that. So that sounds like, a pretty deep dive on one individual. So like, if I'm saying, hey, I want to write to startup founders, you know, how many kind of data points do I need? How many people do I need to talk to before I get a pulse on that whole industry? Or do I need to niche down beyond that?
Oh gosh, that's really, I haven't thought about that. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm very much just
All right.
individual focused.
Yeah.
As a whole, though, that's a very important point. I don't know how many it would take. I mean, it's one of those things, if you're talking within a specific industry and you're regularly talking to people, I would say 5 to 10 people, you're going to get the best sample of all of the different opinions out there, unless you're talking to everybody who has the same opinion. So like if you're talking to somebody on a specific side of the political aisle about politics, you know what I mean?
Right.
You will
Right.
probably get a very similar opinion with some variance. But if you're talking
Totally.
in like tech, or you're talking in like education or something like that, you're going to get a lot of nuance
Yeah.
within that. And so then it comes down to refining, okay, what questions do I ask when I'm interviewing them? What is the most efficient way for me to be personable and be friendly, but also get the information that I need so that I can take the pulse of the industry and really understand the different schools of thought that are being batted around at that time.
Gotcha. Cool. No, yeah, thank you for explaining that. No, I think that was perfect.
Yeah.
And so one tactic or tip that I've learned about recently is like, for example, we're talking about audience, right? And so if I want to speak directly to my audience, one tip I learned recently was don't just pretend you're talking to this huge group of people. Take one person like in that group, in that industry, like a good friend, and write the newsletter for them, because then I think it just puts you in a different way of thinking. You're thinking like, okay, how can I help my friend? What does my friend care about? I don't want to put too much fluff. I want to get to what's actually going to help them, benefit them. And then, in doing that, now you are actually helping a whole group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% a good tactic. And I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because you reminded me that when I'm stuck, that's something that I can do, because it's so easy, even as a writer, to get so focused on one thing or get so paralyzed by the big picture that you have to remember, why am I here? Who am I writing for? Who am I trying to talk to? And how would they be receptive? And one of the simplest ways to do that is to say, okay, if I was talking to my best friend, how would I do that? Maybe they're in my industry, maybe they're not. Maybe they're who I would want to market to, maybe they're not. How would I tell my best friend about what I'm doing? And then you can speak it out, you can write it out, you can do whatever you want to do with it, but get it out of your head and onto some form of media. And then from there, after you've taken a day or a couple hours, some distance from it, you go back, you look at it, and you say, okay, if somebody was giving this to me, would I listen? Do I find it interesting? Would I engage in the product? Would I think that they're trying to help me? And then you can begin to refine the logic and the structure and the flow. And then you can begin to niche down and say, okay, well, what if my best friend were in my target audience? How would I say that to them? What language would I use? What would make sense in their head for them to go, oh yeah, this is the obvious solution to my problem. Here, take my money because you are helping me. Because that's why a lot of people start businesses. And especially in the modern era with so many millennials and even Gen Zers, we want to help people. We're not doing it just for the money. We're not doing it just for our well-being. We're literally doing it to make a better world. And so often that gets lost in translation because the message isn't refined. And so that was one of my major goals and one of the major pain points that I wanted to solve in starting Variantista is, how can you connect to your audience? And how can you help them see that you're there for them? You are there to help them. You're not there to, just one and done, sell them something and then leave them high and dry. You are there for them. And that's the reason that you started your company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. No, I love that. That's beautiful. I think that's a great way to think about it. And I think it goes into like the win-win scenario, right? Both sides of the equation want a good win-win scenario that lasts a long time. So again, I love that. Perfect. Well, that kind of wraps up everything that I had planned. Do you have any other last tips, questions, advice that you want to give to the audience?
Oh gosh, last tips or advice. I would say No, I said that already. I think I said all of the things.
Perfect. That's great. That means we had a good interview. We asked all the good questions. Well, awesome. Well, perfect. So
synergy.
yeah, I mean yeah, right. There you go. Well, awesome. So yeah, the kind of the call to action at the end of this, if you want to get introduced to Katherine, go to variantista.com. Definitely get in contact with her. And yeah, again, thank you for being on here with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Perfect. Thank you for listening to Behind the Startup. If you like the show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review.